all you've done, all you're going to do. God, thank you for life. Thank you for just the youth, the children, God, the adults. God, thank you for church family. God, just what an opportunity to share and grow with one another. I pray tonight would help us to grow. I pray you would use this to teach us and to hopefully know you better, to know your plan. And God, just continue to praise you for always being in control. God, we love you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so kind of taking a pause, kind of not taking a pause. So we're still really in Revelation tonight, but I'm going to move out of Revelation back into Daniel because for the next two Wednesday nights that we go through this, I'm going to jump back to the Old Testament. I'm going to do Daniel because there's some key text in Daniel that we're going to need for the rest of Revelation. And so I'm going to explain that. But kind of where we are in the book of Revelation, that outline of the 119, it says, Therefore write the things which you have seen, the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things. And so we talked about the things which you have seen, which is in chapter 1, and it's that 1:12 where it says, Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. So John's turning, he sees Jesus. So that thing that is, it's the thing that was happening right then. So he wrote down that experience he had with Jesus, and then the things which are, which is chapters 2 and 3. Which were the letters to the churches. We went through those. Took us about 4 or 5 weeks to get through those letters. So that was the present time. Our present time included. We brought that back to today. It wrote it to the angel of the 7 churches. And that was 2:1, 8, 12, 18, chapter 3, 1, verse 7, verse 14. And so that was things that were happening right then, right? We said he was writing to those churches in that time. And we still live in the church age today. We'll talk some more about that as we go through. And then kind of where we go now from chapters 4 through 21, it's the things which will take place. So this is things that will happen after the church age. These are what's coming in the future. And so we see, last week we talked about it in Revelation 4:1. He says, After these things, after the church age, I looked, and behold, a door was standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard, like a sound of a trumpet speaking with me, said, Come up here, and I will show you what may take place after these things. And so that's kind of where we are right now. We're in the things to come. And so I wanted to backtrack a little bit because I think it's going to be helpful as we go forward. And so I took us back. I'm going to take us all the way back to Daniel chapter 2. If you want to be turning there, Jesus refers in Luke chapter 21, verse 24. He says, And they will fall by the edge of the sword. And this is talking about the Jews, the Israelites. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is what they call the time or the age of the Gentiles. Okay, so this is when God kind of changed it, and it starts with with Babylon taking over Jerusalem, and that's where it starts, and that starts the age of the Gentiles. And so there's 2 things in the age of the Gentiles. One is first what he mentions in what Jesus mentions there in chapter 24. Jewish people will suffer death, enslavement, and persecution. That's part of what's happening during the age of the Gentiles, and we'll talk about that some tonight and some of the things that have gone on. And we even see that today, right? Jerusalem is still not what it was. And then the second thing is Jerusalem defiled and under Gentile control. And we know even today things have gone back and forth, but ultimately it's under that Gentile control. And so that's the age of the Gentiles is what we're talking about. We're Gentiles. Unless you're a Jew in here, you're a Gentile. Okay, that's anybody that's not a Jew. And so we're Gentiles. So it's the age of the Gentiles when we have this place with God, and he's putting the punishment onto the Jews, which will change later on. So the age of the Gentiles, but right in the age of the Gentiles, we're in the church age. Okay, so that's part of the age of the Gentiles. We're in the church age right here at this moment. And so I'm going to just summarize because I don't have time to read all of it. But if you go to chapter 2 of Daniel, okay, the first 30 verses basically go like this. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he wants the dream interpreted. So he goes to all the people there that are his wizard, the council, the seers, those that he would call to do it. And he says, hey, I need y'all to interpret this dream. And they said, yeah, sure, we'll interpret it, but tell us the dream. And he says, well, if I tell you the dream, then you'll make something up and I won't even know if it's right or not. So here's what to do. If you really are who you say you are, you tell me what the dream is and then you interpret the dream. And so obviously none of them could do that. And so he told them, and so he basically said, well, I'm going to kill all of them because they're not even who they say they are. They can't do what they say. But there was one, and that was Daniel. And we talked this is chapter 2. Remember in Daniel 1, the Babylon takes over Jerusalem. They take the first and the best out, and that's the young men. And it talks about Daniel and his friends in chapter 1 and how they wouldn't defile themselves with the food. And so Daniel is here, and Daniel says, well, I can do this. I can interpret it. And so that's what we're going to talk about in the start tonight is Daniel actually tells Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was, and then he interprets the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. And this is one way how God had used Daniel and raised him up. I talked about him Sunday in the men's meeting that we had in chapter 1, verse 9. I love that. It says that Daniel purposed himself, your version may say, or mine says made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's food. And so Daniel, in the very beginning, he was a very devout follower of God. We know that because if you read, we're not going to be able to go through all of Daniel, but you know Daniel in the lion's den, he prayed when he wasn't supposed to. He always stood by God and followed God. And so that's where we get today. So he's decided, I can determine the dream. I can interpret this dream. He gets the dream. Verse 19, the dream's revealed to him by God, and then he gives praise to God for giving him the understanding, the knowledge of the dream. And then Daniel goes forward and says, I can do it. The guy takes him to Nebuchadnezzar, and so now he's here. So that's where we are. I'm going to start us off in verse 31. I'm going to start us off in verse 31. I'm going to read 31 through 35. And this is the dream that Daniel that he actually ends up interpreting. But like I said, Nebuchadnezzar didn't want to tell him what it was. So Daniel saw the dream, and then he's going to interpret. So this is the dream. In verse 31, it says, You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that was struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Okay, so now we see the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. He says, this is the dream. You were standing there. You see this great statue in front of you, and you're looking at this statue. Some characteristics of this statue. First, he says the head was made of gold, that it had a gold head. So you can think of a statue. You can go ahead and throw that first slide up about the statue if you want. I got a little reference that we'll kind of look at today as we go through. But the head made of gold, you can see it there. And so you've got this big statue made of these different elements. And so he's got a head made of gold, his breast and his arms made of silver, the belly and the thighs made of bronze, the legs of iron. And it says the feet is actually a combination of iron and clay. And then he goes on and talks about the stone that came down and it crushed the statue. And then it became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And so that's the dream he interprets for Nebuchadnezzar. And so as you continue to go through now the breakdown of that dream, he gives you the interpretation of what it actually means. So now I'm going to go back through and go through 36 through 45. Verse 36 says, This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or beasts of the field, or birds of the sky, he has given them unto your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. I'll pause there, and we'll just break it down piece by piece to kind of go through exactly what he's talking about and interpreting through this dream. And we'll see it more and more, and you may be reading so far, and you're like, what does this have to do with Revelation? Well, you're going to see all that here in just a second. But first he says, you're the head of gold. And I'll backtrack just a little bit. You're going to see this idea from the book there's a criteria of these kingdoms. So we're going to be breaking down the different kingdoms that came through, and you probably saw some of it from that slide. But there's a criteria for these Gentile kingdoms. Remember, we're going into the age of the Gentiles, and remember I told you the two things, that the Jews would go under persecution, and then Jerusalem would be captured, be trampled on by the other people. So those are the two qualifications. That's the start of the age of the Gentiles, okay? That's the start of the age of the Gentiles. And so there's 4 criteria for a kingdom to fulfill that prophecy that we're talking about. The first is it's got to be a Gentile kingdom, obviously, because it's the age of the Gentiles. The second is that it's got to be a dominant power, a dominant worldly power. The third is it's got to defeat their predecessor. And then also the fourth is that it's got to control or trample Jerusalem. So those are the criteria for these kingdoms that are listed. Now, Babylon is the first one that we see, so they didn't have to conquer a predecessor. They conquered Jerusalem. They conquered the Israelites. We know that. So the first thing in verse 36 through 38, he says that you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head. The gold part of the statue, the head, the first, the most expensive thing that's on this statue. This is a representation of the Babylonian Empire. He also says, you, O king, are the king of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. And so not only is Nebuchadnezzar the head of gold, and they're this first kingdom, they're this first nation to fulfill this prophecy of the age of the Gentiles, but also it's very interesting here in 37 and 38, he's saying that you've got all the authority. Babylon was one of the most powerful nations there ever was. And what's interesting is that what he's saying here is that all over the whole world, Nebuchadnezzar had authority. Now, he didn't exercise that. He didn't go into every nation, but it says, wherever the sons of men dwell, wherever the beasts are, wherever birds, like he had complete and utter control over the earth. He could have conquered anybody. That's why they were the biggest nation. And he says, so in the statue, you look at the statue, you see the gold head. Well, that's a picture of Babylon. That's a picture of them at that time. And then he continues to go down. In verse 39, he flies through these two, but so verse 39, he says, and you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Okay, so now we see the next two. So the second one was the breast and the arms of silver. And so the interesting, can you go back to the slide with the other one? Yep, that one right there. So you can see the dates are listed up there. I can't see it from here, but you can see. And so this second kingdom is the Medo-Persian kingdom, nation or alliance. So it's the Medo-Persian, it's the Medes and the Persians who have gotten together. They both have come together, and they're the ones that end up overthrowing Babylon. And they're the next person to take place in this. So they fulfill that category of they're a Gentile kingdom, they're a dominant power, they defeat the predecessor, and they also keep Jerusalem trampled and Jerusalem under their control. And it's interesting that remember, it's a lesser value, silver is than gold. And so the dream says it's a silver breast and arms. And so it even says in the text, it says, after you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. So not only is the silver inferior to the gold, but he says it's a representation of this kingdom's going to be less than Babylon. They don't have the power Babylon did. And so you've got this Medo-Persian, the Medes and the Persians who have come together, and they're the next big dominant kingdom to take over. And he goes really quickly into the third kingdom. He says, and then another kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. So who is that? And your Bible may have headings in there, so you may have a little clue to who some of these are. But this is that the belly and the thigh of bronze, which once again were deteriorating in the quality of the material. And so we've got bronze here, and so that represents the Greeks. The Greek takeover, and more specifically, Alexander the Great. The conquest of Alexander the Great. And so that's who this is representing. It's representing the Greeks. They're the third major kingdom to take over. They took over the Medo-Persians. They had control over Jerusalem. And so they're the next great. They weren't as much of a political power as Babylon and the Persians were, but they were more of a military strength. They had more military power. Obviously, Alexander the Great, if you know anything about him, and I wish I would have paid more attention in history class because I'm getting more and more of this, and I didn't remember a lot of this, and so it's coming back new or fresh anyways. But they were very strong. Alexander the Great would come in and just overpower these places and take them over. And so they had that strong military. And so what ends up happening, though, upon the death of Alexander the Great, the territories they had actually were split. They were split into 4 territories. And so they ended up, the east territories, the 2 for the east and the 2 from the west, actually combined. So it was 2 major territories. And that's where we get a lot of our verbiage today for eastern or western, as far as when you're talking about the different places in the world, whether it's in the east or the west. This was the big divide, the big division. And so upon his list, the 4 main leaders, his military leaders, are the ones who actually took power after he died. And so each of those 4, one of those got one of those areas. Okay, and then two, like I said, bonded together there. So then we go down to verse 40. And this is really the one that's most... they're all important, but this is the one that probably rings more true and spent more time on, and you'll see that as we go through. But this in verse 40, it says, then there will be a 4th kingdom. So we're talking about number 4 now. It's as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So, like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with the common clay. They will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as the iron does not combine with the pottery. So now we've got the 4th kingdom that's mentioned here, and this is the kingdom of Rome. It's the Roman Empire is where it starts from. And so you see that it starts with the legs and goes from the feet all the way even to the toes. And so the legs, the bottom of the legs, it shows that the powerful, that it crushes, and it says that it breaks into pieces. It will crush and break all these into pieces. So it's a strong nation. I think this is around 160 BC when they took over. 63 BC is when they actually took over Jerusalem, invaded Jerusalem. But they follow that same pattern, right? They're a Gentile nation. They conquered Jerusalem. They defeated their predecessors. So they fit all that category. They're the 4th kingdom. This kingdom, though, as you can see, it's different than the rest. It's different than the rest because it starts with one solid material and it actually goes down, and that iron and the pottery actually start combining when you get to the feet. And you can see once again, it gets less in value and it gets weaker and weaker. And so it's different from the rest. And so this one's a little bit harder because it starts with the Roman Empire, but there is a fall of the Roman Empire, but there's no conquering of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire kind of just falls apart where you see most of Europe was the Roman Empire, and since then it's divided into Europe. There's all these different places, and there's always duress over there, and so this is that idea. And when it talks about going down in the feet and the toes, and talks about all these different nations, all these things, we have 200 plus nations in this world now. So it's not this one big dominant force anymore. That's why this kingdom is different than all the other ones. And so now we live in a time where we have so many different nations out there, right? In Europe, we have us, and there's all these different powers out there, but there's not one big dominant out there. And you go on down in verse 44. It says, "In the days of those kings, the God in heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for other people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw a stone was cut out of the mountain with hands, and that it crushed without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy." And so we see the end of this dream, and we see this stone. When you're talking about, if you look back in context, when it talks about stone made, cut out without hands, those are the stones they used to make the altar. But when you say a stone or a rock is going to crush the statue, we know that rock is a representation of Christ, Jesus, right? He's the rock of our salvation. So eventually, now we're talking about the second coming of Christ is going to end the age of the Gentiles. It's going to end the time. So it says that stone is going to come down, and it's going to crush the statue. All kingdoms forever will be destroyed. And then it says if you go back and jump to verse 35, it says, "The stone that struck the statue became a great mountain filled within the whole earth." So mountains, it actually says it here in verse 44. It says, "Those kings of heaven, a kingdom that will never be destroyed, a kingdom that will not be left for other people, will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but itself will endure forever." The vision of a mountain in the Bible, that representation represents a kingdom. And so that's what he says. So when he says Christ is going to come down, he's going to crush all kingdoms that were before, and he's going to set up an eternal kingdom. And that eternal kingdom, like he says, a great mountain that fills the whole earth, he's going to set up an eternal kingdom that's going to cover the whole earth. He'll be over the whole earth. Okay? And a lot of these references we'll come back to when we get back in Revelation. Just to make sure we're right, because a lot of this is actually told about again. So if you want to flip to your right just a little bit to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. We'll start back at the very beginning. So now we see Daniel. This is after the lion's den. He comes out, and so now he has another vision. He has another vision. And so this is the account of the vision. I just put the beast here. The beast. And so in chapter 7, verse 1, it says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And the four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird, and a beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking at the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had a large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little horn, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Okay, so I'm on the horns and the eyes and all that. That'll be next week, so we're okay today. All right, but we want to look back at. You can see how this relates to. Doesn't it sound like Revelation? Yeah, it sounds like what we're about to go into. But so what we see here, we see this dream, this vision that Daniel has, and he says, by the 4 winds of heaven, stirring up the great sea, and he says, I see these 4 great beasts. These 4 great beasts. So this is really a continuation of chapter 2. And so he says, the first one, he says, the first is like a lion and had wings of an eagle. And he said, I kept looking at the wings until they were plucked and lifted up from the ground and been made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was also given to it. So this lion that's represented here, this goes back to Babylon. Okay? If you go back and you look, they dug up artifacts. The actual symbol for the nation of Babylon was a lion with 2 wings. Okay? These things either have to be what they are, or they're the biggest coincidences in the history of the world. Okay? Because it says that he's the lion, had the wings. It's the representation of Babylon. And then the second, it says, and behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. Okay, so this beast is a representation of the Medo-Persians. It's the second kingdom. We know some of those things. One thing it says it was raised up on one side. Well, Persia was the major, was a lot more into that than the Medes were. They were much more powerful. They brought a lot more to that, them coming together. And so the reason that bear is lifted up on one side is because one nation was more powerful than the other as they came together. Not only that, when it talks about the 3 ribs, it says there were 3 ribs in its mouth. Those are the nations that the Medo-Persians devoured. They devoured Babylon, they devoured Lydia, and they devoured Egypt. Those are the 3 great nations that they devoured. So those are represented by the 3 ribs that are in their mouth. And then next we see, after this, I kept looking. Behold, another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird, and the beast also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And so the leopard represents the Greeks, the Alexander the Great, and his. And then the reason that the leopard, you think of a leopard, you think of fast. I hope you do. Leopards are fast. And that really goes to the idea of, man, their conquests were really speedy. They were very efficient, and they would come in and just take it over, and they'd have it all done. So the speed of their conquest. And then also, it says there were 4 wings and 4 heads. Well, I told you earlier, when Alexander the Great died, it was split up into 4 regions with 4 leaders. Those were his 4 military leaders. Each one got a region. So those are representations of the 4 head and the 4 wings. The 4 wings are the regions, and the 4 heads are the people that are over those regions. And so now we see the Greeks and theirs, and then now we see this 4th beast. See the 4th beast, verse 7. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and had 10 horns. Okay? So now we know the 4th beast is the same 4th kingdom. That would be Rome. Rome is the 4th. And some things we have that we see. Remember I said at the first in chapter 2 that the 4th kingdom was different than all the rest of the kingdoms. We see that here too. He actually says it. It's not like any of the kingdoms that were before it. And that's why it started as one big nation, but we're still under that time frame right now. Still under that time frame right now. But it was so different. You notice all the other ones have an animal to compare it to, but the fourth does not have an animal. He doesn't compare it to an animal. He just says it's terrifying. It's terrifying and extremely strong. So there's no real vision of this animal. Like there's nothing even to compare it to, this beast that he says has 10 horns and is different than all the rest. And so we see the four kingdoms laid out again. And a lot of this will come together next week, so you're just going to have to stay with me. And I don't have time to get into what is coming from behind this, but we'll see. So look down at verse 15 of this. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. We're not going to get into the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man and all that tonight. But for verse 15 is this vision that he has at the beginning of chapter 7. It's interpreted here. So let's look at the interpretation. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. And you got to think, now we're looking back in history too. So it's really easy for us to line up Babylon, Medo-Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, right? Because we can look back and we can see these sections of time where all this. Right now, when he's having this dream, Babylon's still in control. So Daniel's like, I don't know what all this. It's kind of, I throw it up here and y'all are like, yeah, that makes sense, you know. But he didn't have that. He didn't have that to be able to look back on. So it says he was distressed within me. The visions in my mind kept alarming me. Verse 16, I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Verse 17, these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 great kings who will arise from the earth. Right? The 4 great kings, 4 great kingdoms. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come, right? That's the kingdom that Jesus sets up. That's the kingdom, the eternal kingdom. He said, then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, and its teeth of iron, claws of bronze, and which devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder of these feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before the 3 of them fell, namely born, which had eyes and a mouth, uttering great boast, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. He says, I kept looking at the horn, was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came the judgment and passed in favor of the saints, the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus he said, the 4th beast will be the 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. And he will intend to make alterations in the times and the law, and they will be given to his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So tonight, because we are pretty much out of time, you can see now we get confirmation of the interpretation, right? Everything I've said so far makes sense now because we've read this. It says it's the 4 kingdoms. The 4th is different than all the rest. Now I know it gets really confusing when we start talking about horns, and there's another horn, and it's a smaller horn. It's got eyes and mouth, and it's going to destroy 3 other horns. We're going to cover all that next time. Okay, so we don't have time to get into all that tonight, but know that he's talking back. We look back now and we see it through history. We can see the time periods, we can see the breakdown, and we can see what's happening. So what I'm trying to get before we move on to things that are to come, I want to make sure that we understand that we're in this age or time of the Gentiles. The Gentiles are in control, that one day that's going to end and the power will go back to Jerusalem. Because when you think about it, before they were taken over by Babylon, in the times of Solomon and all the kings of Israel, Israel was the most powerful place on earth. And then they were taken over by the Gentiles. And so it's coming back a day. That's what he says. There's coming back a day when Jerusalem will be restored and the Jews will be the most powerful people on the earth, be the most powerful nation on the earth. We know that's not right now, don't we? We see all the turmoil that's happened in Israel right now, and it's been like that for as long as any of us can remember. Why? Because we're still in the age of the Gentiles. And so, once again, he sees the dream. He sees those. We'll talk about the horns and all those things next week. So, is everybody more confused today than when they walked in here? Yeah. I promise it's going to come more together even next week. But this should give you a pretty good idea of how God shifted it. And now we live in this time, this age of Gentiles. And that's why Paul talks about it in Romans. That's why we're the ones receiving the promise now. We're the ones. Christ came. He allowed us to be part of the promise. He made a new covenant. We're under this new covenant now. And ultimately, it's going to end with the return of Jesus, the second advent, the second coming. Okay? Everybody good? Yep. All right. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your spirit, for allowing us to understand and have knowledge, God. And thank you for those who are a lot wiser than me, God, that help me to learn and grow. God, continue to teach us. God, we know that you have a plan. And what a comfort it is to look back and see all the predictions of all these things that you know are going to happen. And you've given us a vision into the future. And you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now, and you'll be faithful forever. And so we thank you for that, Lord. And I pray that through the reading, through the studying of Daniel, through Revelation, God, we strengthen our faith. And God, we encourage our hope, that we may have that hope that others see, that we'd always be ready, prepared to have a defense for. God, use us to teach others, to grow others, and to be a light, that others may see our good works and glorify you. We ask all this in your Son, Jesus. Amen.